Ever wondered how people survived without refrigerators? Let's take a trip back to the Middle Ages, a time from around 500 to 1500 AD, where keeping food fresh was a daily challenge. They didn't have freezers or even simple ice boxes, yet they mastered the art of making food last for months, even years. Their methods were incredibly clever and born from pure necessity. So, how did they do it? Let's dive into the fascinating world of medieval food preservation. The undisputed champion of preservation was salt. Salt was so valuable back then, it was sometimes literally worth its weight in gold. People would rub massive amounts of salt into meat and fish. This drew out all the moisture that bacteria need to grow. They'd pack barrels with alternating layers of salt and meat, essentially mummifying the food. Pork, beef, and especially fish could last for months this way. Salt cod became a huge deal, funding entire fishing industries and creating major trade routes across Europe. Even the poorest families would save up to buy salt because it was the key to surviving the long, harsh winters. Fun fact, the word salary actually comes from the Latin word for salt, salarium, which just shows how crucial it was to society. Another brilliant technique was smoking. Medieval folks built special little buildings called smokehouses. They'd hang meat and fish inside over smoldering wood fires, sometimes for days or even weeks. The smoke contained natural chemicals that killed bacteria and formed a protective, flavorful crust on the food. And the type of wood they used made a big difference. Oak gave meat a rich, hearty flavor, while applewood added a touch of sweetness. Think about it, bacon, ham, and smoked sausages were all medieval staples that could hang in a cool pantry for months. Fish like herring and salmon were smoked until they turned a beautiful golden brown. Walking through a medieval village must have been an amazing sensory experience, with all those delicious smoky aromas in the air. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. Medieval people figured out that combining methods was even better. They would often salt their meat first and then smoke it, creating a powerful double barrier against spoilage. Sometimes they'd even add honey or vinegar to the mix for an extra layer of preservation. Monasteries actually became hubs of food science, with monks meticulously documenting which combinations worked best for different kinds of food. Drying was probably the simplest method of all, using nature's own tools, the sun and the wind. People would slice fruits like apples, pears, and plums into thin rings and lay them out on wooden racks to dry in the sun. Herbs were gathered into bundles and hung from the rafters inside their homes. Grains were spread out on floors to dry completely before being stored away. Even vegetables like peas and beans were dried so they could be used in winter stews. In warmer coastal areas, fish were just laid out on rocks by the sea, letting the salty air and sunshine do all the work. Root vegetables like carrots, turnips, and onions were a bit easier. People stored them in cool, dark cellars dug deep into the ground. These root cellars were amazing because they maintained a surprisingly steady, cool temperature all year round, keeping the veggies fresh for months. Pickling became a true art form. People would submerge all sorts of things, vegetables, eggs, even some meats in either vinegar or a very salty water solution called brine. The high acidity of the pickling liquid made it impossible for harmful bacteria to grow. This is how they got delicious things like sauerkraut from cabbage and pickles from cucumbers. Every household had big clay pots or wooden barrels filled with pickled goods. This didn't just preserve the food, it also created tangy, exciting flavors that really spiced up an otherwise bland winter diet. Medieval cooks even experimented by adding spices like mustard seeds, peppercorns, and dill to their pickling brines. Here's another interesting detail. The wealthy used honey for preservation all the time. Honey is a natural antibacterial and basically never spoils. They would submerge fruits, nuts, and even cook meats in honey. This created sweet, delicious preserves that would last almost indefinitely. Archaeologists have even found pots of honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that are still perfectly edible thousands of years later. For medieval nobles, honey-preserved foods were a serious luxury, often served at huge feasts to show off their wealth and status. Fermentation was a game-changer. It was both a way to preserve food and a way to create entirely new things to eat and drink. Milk was transformed into cheese and yogurt, which lasted way longer than fresh milk. Grapes were turned into wine, and grains were turned into beer. These fermented drinks were not only preserved, but they were often safer to drink than water, which could be contaminated with diseases. Cheese-making was especially vital. A single large wheel of cheese could feed a family for weeks. Hard cheeses, coated in wax, could last 4 years if stored properly in a cool cellar. People also used fat as a preservative. They'd cook meat thoroughly, pack it tightly into pots, and then pour hot, rendered fat or lard over the top. As the fat cooled, it created a perfect airtight seal. This technique, known as potting or confit, protected the meat from air and bacteria. When it was sealed correctly and kept in a cool place, potted meats like duck, goose, and pork could last for months. Here's something truly clever. Medieval people lived by the seasons. They ate fresh foods whenever they were available and worked tirelessly to preserve any surplus for the lean times ahead. Autumn was an incredibly busy season. It was a race against time to preserve the harvest before the first frost. This was also when they would slaughter most of their livestock. The cold weather meant the meat wouldn't spoil as quickly, giving them a crucial window of time to salt, smoke, and process everything for the winter. This timing was absolutely essential for survival. For the very wealthy, there were ice houses. Rich landowners would send workers to cut huge blocks of ice from frozen lakes in the winter. They'd store this ice in deep pits underground, insulated with thick layers of straw and sawdust. Some of this ice could actually last until the summer, providing a very limited form of refrigeration for the privileged few. But for the vast majority of ordinary people, this was completely out of reach. Living without refrigeration meant that medieval people had a deep, practical understanding of their food. They could tell just by the smell, the texture, and the look of something whether it was safe to eat. They wasted almost nothing. Their techniques were so effective that many of them are still used today. We still smoke salmon, make pickles, dry herbs, and age cheese using methods that a medieval cook would instantly recognize. These preservation methods weren't just about survival. They created the foundation for many of the flavors and beloved food traditions that we still enjoy in our modern kitchens today. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating history.